Hello, my name is Nadine and welcome to Hop Along Studio. So in today's video, I want to share with you this simple card project. So this card project is using some Brushos, embossing ink, embossing powder, and a die cut machine to make a very simple and beautiful Christmas card. So for those who have been subscribing to my channel, I just want to say thank you for your support. It does mean a lot to me. For those who have not subscribed, if you could just hit the little button below and also maybe click the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. So let's get started on this week's project. So let's talk about the paper that we'll be using today. In this case, I am using a piece of watercolor paper that I use Brusho powders on to alter the color of. So basically with the Brusho pigment powders, I started with a white piece of paper, I added the Brusho powders, and I spritzed it to get this background, and then I let it dry. If you'd like to actually see the process video for creating Brusho backgrounds like this, I have included the link below. Really, for this project, you can really use any sort of pattern paper you like. I like personally creating some of my own just because of the variety of color that I get and the variety of pattern. And so how does this relate to our project? Basically, you take this piece of paper, and if you are using a medium like Brushos or watercolor paint that could possibly be wet, I would suggest using a workable fixative, like this Krylon workable fixative, or a sealant to seal these, because we are going to be adhering them with wet glue, and sometimes that can cause them to re-wet and run. So it's just a really easy way of making sure you get really consistent results in your project. So after I let this paper dry, I basically cut it into squares, and using this particular die cut, I believe this is a color box die cut. I would have to check. I've actually had this one for maybe 5 to 7 years, and it's basically a very simple Christmas tree. But when you use it in a die cut machine, you get these really great tree shapes. And what you'll notice about all these tree shapes is the variety of color in them. They're not one consistent color, and this is part of the reason I like using watercolor paper that I have colored myself over just using a pattern paper, because you get a lot more variety in color, and I believe this gives a little bit more of a handmade look to your card. So usually when I do cards, I usually do a flat piece of paper that I actually adhere to a card back. In this case, because these card backs are quite nice and the technique we're using is quite simple, I'm just going to do my embossing straight onto the card back. So in this case, I have this star stamp that I ended up getting in Seattle at a place called Impress. I go there every few years on vacation, and I usually end up picking up some stamps. So I'm also using this Top Boss embossing stamp pad that's clear, and I am adding it to my stamp. And then you just want to stamp randomly on your card. And this is pretty much impossible to see because it is clear. And what I'm going to do is pop this into my little embossing tray. I usually use a box for this, but today I'm being a little bit lazy, so I am just going to quickly do this in my little tray. And I am actually using this Judikins white diamond embossing powder. The reason I'm using the white diamond is it gives it a little bit of sparkle, but it doesn't necessarily add a ton of color. This is part of the reason I usually use a box. If you see the mess I'm making on my on my crafting surface, this is why I usually use a box, because I find it very hard to keep this from getting quite messy. I'm just going to set this aside and heat set this. So I'm sure it's quite hard to see I'm going to try to move this around so you can see that there's a little bit of sparkle. And basically this little star image has showed up very lightly. You'll see a little bit of the sparkle, see a little bit of the white on white. The idea was not to have this image move to the forefront. The point was for it to stay as a background image. Something similar you could do is use a watermark stamp pad. It would be even more subtle than this. But this is a technique that I like using for this card because it does give that little bit of sparkle. You can see it on the finished card, and I will zoom in once I'm done this card so you can see it a little bit better. But once you have completed this step, the next thing you want to do is add on your Christmas tree. So in this case, I'm going to use this Christmas tree. I like this particular one the best. And I think the key is just make sure it's nice and centered and that it's in a great place on your card. So the key to adhering this down is using the right glue. I would say if you're only going to do a few of these, I would maybe suggest actually doing this on double-sided adhesive, actually die cutting the whole image on double-sided adhesive so that you can basically just take it off like a sticker and stick it to your project. In this case, because I'm doing multiples, I'm just going to use some glue. But I find sometimes with using glue, it's hard to get a really even coat. So I'm actually using this PPA matte adhesive glue. What's nice about this particular glue is it does dry clear. So I'm just using a Ranger blending tool with a little foam to add some glue to my foam. And then I'm going to very gently tap it onto my image. What this does is it gives a really consistent amount of glue on your tree, and then that way you can adhere to your card and not have to re-glue things multiple times. And even in this case, even though I have sprayed this to make sure that it won't bleed, I would say still have really clean hands and still be very careful. I find with the Brusho powders, they do like to bleed a lot. I even am very careful about what surface I do my Brusho powders on because they are very, very highly pigmented and they manage to kind of get everywhere. So I hope you've enjoyed this project. I know it's been very, very simple, but that was kind of the point, to come up with something that you could do that was easily repeatable and really effective. I've actually donated cards like this to charity auctions and I found they went quite quickly just because they are very simple, they're very elegant, and they have a very handmade feel to them, and sometimes that's enough for a greeting card. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, if you could like it, subscribe to my channel, and maybe provide a comment below about what you liked about this video. I also have my website, Hop Along Studio, where I have other Christmas card ideas, as well as other ideas on how you can build a creative habit in your own life. I hope you have a really great week, and I will see you next time.